Use the loading dock, Daniel. The front entrance is for people who belong here. Claire said it quietly, but not quietly enough. The young receptionist behind the glass desk heard every word, and so did the security guard standing beneath the silver letters that spelled Mercer Industrial Systems across the factory entrance. Rain tapped against the steel awning above us, steady and cold, while a line of black sedans rolled toward the executive parking lot. Through the wide lobby windows, I could see caterers arranging coffee, photographers checking their cameras, and senior managers practicing the smiles they planned to wear for the investors. Claire stood between me and the doors in a navy suit that probably cost more than my first pickup truck. Her blonde hair was pinned neatly behind her ears, and the small gold badge on her jacket read Vice President of Corporate Strategy. She looked polished, important, and completely embarrassed by the man standing in front of her. I glanced down at my faded canvas jacket, dark jeans, and work boots. They were clean, but they were not the uniform of the people arriving in chauffeured cars. I was invited, I said. My voice stayed level. Claire's eyes moved toward the receptionist, then back to me. This is not a family tour. The board is here. Investors are here. Victor is announcing the expansion plan, and I cannot spend the morning explaining why my husband showed up looking like a contractor. Behind her, someone opened the lobby doors, and warm air carrying the smell of fresh coffee reached us before the glass closed again. I could have told her that I remembered when there was no lobby. I could have told her that the ground beneath those polished floors had once been cracked concrete covered in machine dust. I could have pointed to the bronze plaque beside the entrance, the one partly hidden by a flower arrangement, and asked her to read the founder's name engraved across the top. Instead, I looked at her hand resting near the door handle. Her wedding ring caught the gray morning light. Mine felt unusually heavy. You want me to go around back? I asked. Claire exhaled as if I were making a simple instruction. Difficult. The loading dock is on the west side. Park near receiving, check in with security, and someone can bring you upstairs after the presentation starts. Please, Daniel, just do this one thing without turning it into a statement. That was the part that stayed with me. Without turning it into a statement. For almost 6 years, I had avoided statements. I had stepped away from interviews, ceremonies, and executive meetings. I had let other men stand beneath the company logo and speak as though the factory had appeared because of a clever quarterly plan. I had watched Claire rise through the organization without using my name to open doors for her. At first, she had respected that. Later, she began rewriting it. To her colleagues, I became a former consultant, then a retired engineer. Eventually, I became the husband who did not seem to do much of anything. I looked through the glass again. 2,000 employees were already inside, clocking in, checking gauges, lifting tools, and starting machines that could be heard as a low vibration beneath our feet. Most of the younger workers had never met me. Some of the older ones had not seen me in more than a decade. Claire believed that men I no longer belonged there. She did not know why Marcus had called me at 5:40 that morning. She did not know what had been uncovered in the audit, or whose signature appeared at the bottom of the proposed sale agreement. Most of all, she did not know what authority was still waiting behind my name. I nodded once. All right. Relief softened her face. She leaned closer and lowered her voice. Thank you. We can talk tonight. I did not tell her that by tonight, the company would have a different chairman. I stepped back into the rain, walked across the visitor lot, and climbed into my 12-year-old Ford. Claire turned toward the bright lobby before I had even closed the door. For a moment, I watched her greet Victor Langford with a smile I had not seen at home in months. Then I started the engine and followed the service road toward the west side of the factory. The pavement narrowed. The glass walls disappeared behind corrugated steel, exhaust vents, stacked pallets, and yellow safety rails. This was the side of the building executives rarely photographed. It was also the side I remembered best. Claire thought she had sent me to the entrance reserved for people no one noticed. She had actually sent me to the last place in the factory where people still remembered exactly who I was. The service road curved behind the factory and ended beside 6 loading bays framed by yellow steel posts. Rainwater ran in narrow streams across the pavement, carrying dust and oil toward a graded drain. I parked beside a row of delivery trucks and sat for a moment with both hands resting on the steering wheel. Through the windshield, I watched workers in reflective vests guide pallets beneath the shelter of the dock. No one carried umbrellas. They moved with the quick, practiced rhythm of people who knew the weather did not change the schedule. I understood that rhythm. For years, it had been mine. I stepped out, pulled my jacket closed, and walked toward the security booth. The young guard inside could not have been more than 25. His name tag read Aaron Bishop. He looked from me to my truck, then slid open the small window. "Delivery paperwork?" he asked. "I am here for the anniversary event," I said. His eyes dropped to a tablet mounted beside the desk. "Guests are supposed to enter through the main lobby." I was directed here. Aaron studied me for another second, probably trying to decide whether I was confused or simply stubborn. "Company name?" "Mercer." He typed it in. Nothing useful appeared. That did not surprise me. Victor Langford had removed my name from most public schedules years ago. Aaron tried again, then shook his head. "I do not see a contractor under that name." "Do you have identification?" I handed him my driver license. He compared the photograph, entered the information, and asked me to wait beside a painted line on the concrete. I could have called Marcus. One call would have opened every door in the building. Instead, I stood beneath the metal awning while rain drummed above my head. There are moments when a man learns more by being ignored than he ever could by being welcomed. From where I waited, I could see the receiving crew unloading a crate of turbine housings. One worker steadied the pallet while another operated the forklift. The warning light on the vehicle flashed, but the backup alarm made no sound. Near Bay 4, a damaged safety rail had been wrapped with orange tape instead of replaced. A sign that once required two-person inspections had been covered by a newer sheet listing production targets. I remembered approving the original rule after a close call during our third year. Back then, every supervisor understood that no shipment mattered more than the person moving it. Somewhere along the way, that belief had become expensive. Aaron returned my license through the window. "I am sorry, Mr. Mercer. I cannot let you pass this point without authorization." "You are doing your job," I said. He seemed surprised that I was not angry. "I can call the front office." "Please do." He picked up the phone, but no one answered. The anniversary presentation was probably beginning. In the distance, beyond the steel walls, the machinery carried a deep mechanical hum through the floor. I placed one boot against the edge of the painted line and felt the vibration travel through the sole. It was weaker than I remembered. That told me at least one production section was running below capacity. The audit had mentioned delayed maintenance, but paper never told the whole story. Buildings spoke through sound, temperature, and smell. This one sounded tired. A worker pushing an empty pallet jack slowed as he passed me. He was in his early 30s, with clear safety glasses and a patch on his jacket that read Ethan Cole, Mechanical Engineering. He glanced at my face, then at the security booth. "Are you waiting for receiving?" he asked. "Something like that." He looked toward the silent backup alarm and lowered his voice. "You should stay behind the yellow line. Management has been cutting repair time, and that forklift has been on the service list for 3 weeks. Before I could answer, a supervisor called his name from across the dock. Ethan raised one hand and hurried away. 3 weeks. The report Marcus sent me had listed that repair as completed 12 days earlier. I watched the forklift turn again without a sound. The first lie was no longer sitting inside a spreadsheet. It was moving across the floor in front of me. Aaron tried the office a second time. Still no answer. Then the personnel door beside Bay 2 opened, and an older man stepped outside carrying a clipboard. His shoulders were broader than they had been years ago, and what remained of his hair had turned silver, but I recognized his careful walk immediately. Thomas Alvarez had been the 18th employee I hired. He had worked beside me when the factory had one production line, 2 unreliable heaters, and more unpaid invoices than finished orders. He looked toward the trucks, checked the unloading crew, and nearly walked past me. Then he stopped. The clipboard lowered slowly to his side. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. His eyes moved across my face as if he were comparing me to a memory he had kept for a long time. "Daniel," he finally said. Aaron looked up from his desk. Thomas took one step closer. The years between us seemed to disappear beneath the sound of the rain. "Daniel Mercer," he said again, louder this time. A forklift operator turned his head. Then another worker looked over from the receiving table. Thomas set down his clipboard and held out both hands. "We were told you were never coming back." I gripped his hands and felt the same rough calluses I remembered from the factory floor. "So was I said. His expression changed. Surprise gave way to something heavier, something close to relief. He glanced toward the main building, where Claire and Victor were presenting their future to a room full of investors. Then he looked back at me and said, "You need to see what they have done to this place." Thomas did not wait for permission. He picked up his clipboard, nodded toward the personnel door, and said, "Come with me. There is something you need to see before anyone upstairs realizes you are here." Aaron stepped out of the security booth, uncertain whether he should stop us. Thomas looked at him and said, "Mr. Bishop, this man does not need a visitor badge." Aaron glanced from Thomas to me. "I still need authorization." "You have it," Thomas replied, "from employee number 18. He pulled open the steel door, and warm factory air rolled over us, carrying the familiar mixture of cutting fluid, hot metal, and industrial soap. That smell reached deeper than memory. It took me back to mornings when I arrived before sunrise and nights when I left after the cleaning crew. I followed Thomas through a narrow corridor lined with dented lockers and faded safety posters. Several workers looked up as we passed. Most saw an older man in a wet jacket walking beside a veteran supervisor. A few stared longer. Thomas said nothing until we reached a small storage room behind receiving. He unlocked the door and switched on a fluorescent light that flickered twice before holding steady. Shelves filled the room from floor to ceiling. Old binders, retired tools, archived equipment tags, and boxes marked with dates from the earliest years of the company sat beneath a layer of dust. Thomas walked to the back wall and pulled down a gray plastic container. "Rebecca told me to clear this room last year," he said. "Victor wanted everything moved off-site. He called it clutter." He placed the container on a workbench and lifted the lid. Inside was a white hard hat, yellowed slightly with age. The old company emblem remained on the front, a simple blue gear surrounding the letter M. Beneath it, printed in black, was the number 001. I touched the edge of the helmet but did not pick it up. I thought this was gone. "They threw away the original signs," Thomas said. "They removed the photographs from the main hallway. They even changed the name of the training center. I kept this." My thumb moved across a shallow scratch near the brim. I remembered exactly where it came from. During our first winter, I had been helping install ventilation above production line 4. The helmet had scraped against a steel support while I was checking a measurement. We had no maintenance department then. We barely had a company. Thomas watched my face. "Put it on. That is not why I came." "Maybe not," he said, "but people need to remember." I lifted the hard hat and settled it onto my head. The suspension had been replaced, but the weight felt the same. Thomas smiled for the first time. "Still fits." When we stepped back into the corridor, the reaction was immediate, though quiet. A woman carrying inspection forms stopped near the lockers. Her name was Denise Walker. I had hired her as a quality technician more than 20 years earlier. She looked at the helmet, then at me, and covered her mouth with one hand. "Mr. Mercer?" she asked. I nodded. Denise placed the forms on a table and walked over slowly. "My husband still talks about what you did when the medical bills came." I remembered her husband, Paul, and the heart surgery their insurance had nearly refused to cover. I had changed providers the following month. "How is he?" I asked. "Retired. Fishing whenever the weather allows." Her eyes shone, but her voice remained steady. "He is alive. That is how he is." 2 mechanics had stopped behind her. One whispered my name to the other. Thomas opened the next door, and we entered the receiving floor. The space widened around us. High ceilings crossed by steel beams, overhead lights reflecting from the polished sections of concrete. Forklifts moved between marked lanes. Crates waited beside scanning stations. At first, the shift continued as usual. Then Denise followed us out. She spoke to a woman at the inspection desk. The woman looked toward me and reached for the radio clipped to her vest. I heard only 4 words. "He is really here." The message traveled without instruction. A dock worker near Bay 3 lifted his cap. An older machinist stepped away from a tool cart and stared at the number on my helmet. Another worker took out his phone, but Thomas raised one finger and shook his head. "Not yet," he said. "Let him see the floor first." Ethan Cole returned from the far side of receiving. He noticed the people gathering and walked toward us. His gaze moved from my face to the helmet. "What is happening?" he asked. Thomas rested one hand on his shoulder. "Ethan, this is Daniel Mercer." Ethan waited for more. "The Daniel Mercer?" Thomas said. The young engineer looked toward the company emblem painted 30 feet above the floor, then back at me. Understanding arrived slowly. "You founded this place." With a lot of help, I said. Ethan glanced at the silent forklift alarm, and something changed in his expression. Respect was there, but so was urgency. Then you need to know the reports are false, he said. Repairs are being marked complete when no work has been done. Supervisors are being told to keep the lines moving no matter what the maintenance logs say. Thomas looked toward the cameras mounted above receiving. We should move. He led us deeper into the building, away from the executive wing and toward the older production section. Workers continued turning as we passed. Some recognized my face. Others recognized the helmet. A few recognized only the way the older employees reacted. No announcement had been made, but the factory had begun to whisper. Claire was upstairs telling investors that the company had outgrown its past. Down on the floor, the past had just put on helmet number 001 and started walking toward the truth. The older production section had changed less than the rest of the factory. The paint was newer, the control panels were digital, and the overhead cranes moved with quieter motors, but the bones of the place were still familiar. I knew where the concrete dipped near line 4. I knew which support column had been poured 2 inches out of position. I knew that the narrow office above the tool room had once been my bedroom, although no one called it that. Thomas walked beside me while Ethan followed a few steps behind, answering questions about maintenance schedules and staffing levels. I listened, but part of me had already traveled backward 25 years. Back then, there had been no executive lobby, no glass conference rooms, and no company badge waiting at the front desk. There had been one rented warehouse outside Youngstown, Ohio, 12 employees, 3 secondhand machines, and a bank account that seemed to shrink every time I looked at it. I was 32 years old and convinced that determination could solve anything. Determination helped, but it did not pay the electric bill. Our first major order came from a farm equipment supplier in Indiana. They needed 4,000 precision housings, delivered before the end of January. The contract was larger than anything we had handled, and I accepted it before admitting to myself that our equipment was barely capable of producing half that number. For 6 weeks, we worked 12-hour shifts. I slept in the office on a folding cot and kept a clean shirt hanging behind the door for meetings. Thomas ran the evening crew. Denise checked every 10th part by hand because our inspection system was older than some of the workers using it. We drank coffee that had been sitting on the burner for hours and measured progress by the number of finished crates lined against the wall. Then the main furnace failed 3 days before Christmas. The repair company wanted payment before sending a technician. I did not have it. Payroll was due Friday, the rent was late, and the bank had already warned me that there would be no additional credit. I remember sitting alone on the warehouse floor with a calculator, a legal pad, and $27 in my wallet. Every number ended the same way. I could repair the furnace, or I could pay the people who had trusted me. I could not do both. The next morning, I drove to the small house I had bought after college. It was not much, just 2 bedrooms, a narrow yard, and a detached garage where the first Mercer prototype had been assembled. I signed the sale papers before lunch. By the end of the day, the furnace company had its deposit, and every employee had a paycheck waiting in an envelope. I moved the folding cot from the office into the warehouse because there was no longer anywhere else to sleep. I never told the crew what I had done. Thomas found out when he offered to drive me home, and I told him I was already there. He stood in the doorway for a long time without speaking. The next evening, he brought a hot plate, 2 blankets, and a small artificial Christmas tree his wife had planned to throw away. Denise brought soup. Someone else brought a radio. By the end of the week, the office looked less like a storage room and more like a place where a man could survive long enough to build something. We finished the order 9 hours before the deadline. The payment kept the company alive. More orders followed. 12 employees became 40, then 200, then more than 2,000 across multiple facilities. People later called it strategy. They wrote articles about disciplined expansion and operational courage. The truth was less polished. We survived because people stayed late when they did not have to. We grew because machinists taught new hires instead of guarding what they knew. We became a company because everyone understood one rule I repeated until it became part of the walls. Machines could be replaced, but people could not. That rule shaped every decision I made. It was why we paid for training. It was why we changed medical insurance when it failed Denise and her husband. It was why no one lost a job during the recession, even when executives told me layoffs would make the quarterly reports look cleaner. I had built the company to manufacture equipment, but I had also built it to keep promises. As we reached line 4, Thomas stopped beside the old support column and placed his hand against the steel. "You remember this?" he asked. "2 inches off," I said. He smiled. Ethan looked between us. "You really worked on this floor?" "Every station," I said. "Every shift." A warning light flashed above the line, and the conveyor slowed. The workers adjusted without complaint, moving around a problem they had clearly learned to live with. I looked at their faces and felt the weight of the helmet on my head. Upstairs, Claire and Victor were describing the company as if its value lived in property, contracts, and projected margins. Down here, the truth was standing in work boots. I had left because I believed the culture we created was strong enough to survive without me. Watching those workers compensate for neglected equipment, I began to understand my mistake. A promise does not remain alive simply because it was once spoken. Someone has to keep saying it when the people in power decide it has become inconvenient. Claire had not always been ashamed of the factory. When I met her, she was 27 years old, working as a financial analyst for a regional bank that had rejected my loan application twice. She came to the warehouse one afternoon to review our equipment before the bank reconsidered a small line of credit. I expected someone in a gray suit carrying a checklist. Claire arrived wearing a red wool coat, practical shoes, and an expression that suggested she had already read every number I hoped to explain. She walked the entire floor, asked Thomas why one machine produced more scrap than the others, and noticed that I had listed my office address as my home address. "Do you live here?" she asked. I told her it saved time. She looked at the folding cot, the hot plate, and the plastic Christmas tree still sitting on a filing cabinet in March. She did not laugh. She approved the loan. 2 weeks later, she returned with a box of sandwiches and said she wanted to see what I planned to build with the bank's money. That was Claire before polished conference rooms and executive dinners. She knew the names of the machinists. She drank coffee from a foam cup beside the loading dock. She once spent an entire Saturday helping Denise organize insurance forms because our office manager was home with the flu. When we married, the reception was held in the cleared section of the warehouse between lines 2 and 3. Thomas hung white lights from the ceiling beams. The crew built a temporary dance floor from shipping platforms and covered it with clean plywood. Claire wore a simple dress and laughed when machine oil left a faint mark near the hem. She said it made the day honest. For years, she understood what the company meant to me. She knew it was not only an asset. It was the place where people had trusted me before there was evidence that trust would be rewarded. She never asked me to choose between our marriage and the factory. She became part of both. The change did not happen all at once. It came through small adjustments that seemed reasonable at the time. After the company expanded, Claire completed a master's degree in business administration and joined the corporate finance department. She wanted to earn her place without being introduced as the founder's wife, and I respected that. I asked human resources to remove my name from her internal profile. I stayed out of her evaluations. When she was promoted, I congratulated her at home instead of appearing at the office celebration. At first, her independence made us stronger. Then the distance became useful to her. The more successful she became, the less of our history she shared. At company dinners, she introduced me as someone who had stepped away from manufacturing. Later, she called me a retired engineer. The word founder disappeared from her stories. She said it prevented awkward questions. I let it go because I believed a secure man did not need every room to know his importance. When I withdrew from daily operations after my father died, I gave Claire even more space. Grief had left me tired in a way sleep could not repair. I wanted mornings without earnings calls and evenings without reports stacked on the kitchen table. I kept my ownership inside the Mercer Legacy Trust and allowed professional managers to run the company. Claire knew the trust existed, but she never asked how it worked. She assumed stepping away meant surrendering control. I never corrected her because I did not think our marriage required a corporate briefing. That silence became the space where contempt grew. She started measuring work by visibility. Because I no longer wore a suit to an office, she decided I was no longer building anything. Because my name was absent from press releases, she began treating my achievements as part of a distant past. At home, she talked about Victor's decisions, Victor's strategy, and Victor's leadership. She rarely asked how I spent my days restoring equipment for technical schools or advising small manufacturers without charging them. Those things did not impress the people at her table. Over time, she began speaking to me as though my quiet life were an embarrassment she had been forced to manage. Standing beside line 4, I remembered the woman in the red coat who had once looked at an unfinished factory and seen possibility. I wondered when she had stopped seeing people and started seeing positions. Thomas watched the workers adjust another slowing conveyor. "She is upstairs with Victor, is she not?" he asked. "Yes. Does she know you still control the trust?" "No." Thomas gave me a long look. "Then today is going to be difficult for her." I turned toward the glass offices suspended above the production floor. Through the windows, I could see distant figures gathering around a presentation screen. One of them wore a navy suit. Even from that far away, I recognized Claire's posture. Straight back, lifted chin, every detail arranged to show that she belonged at the center of the room. She had once loved the man who slept beside a machine because he refused to abandon his employees. That morning, she had sent the same man to the loading dock so no one important would see him. What Claire did not understand was that I had never needed the people upstairs to remember me. The question was whether the people downstairs still did. The answer to Thomas's question was buried inside a legal document Claire had never bothered to read. 15 years earlier, when Mercer Industrial Systems expanded beyond Ohio, my attorney, Marcus Reed, urged me to separate control from visibility. He said founders often made one of two mistakes. They either held too tightly until the company became dependent on them, or they stepped away so completely that strangers rewrote the purpose of what they had built. I wanted neither. Together, we created the Mercer Legacy Trust. On paper, the arrangement looked simple. The trust held 54% of the voting shares. Independent directors handled routine governance. I remained the beneficiary, but my name did not appear on daily filings, public announcements, or executive schedules. Victor could run the company. Claire could build her career. I could disappear from the spotlight without surrendering the responsibility that came with ownership. What almost no one knew was that the trust included a return clause. Marcus called it the empty chair provision. As long as the company operated honestly, protected its strategic assets, and avoided large-scale employment decisions made solely to inflate short-term value, my chair at the head of the board remained empty. The directors could vote, the chief executive officer could lead, and I would not interfere. But if 3 specific conditions occurred, the chair stopped being symbolic. The first condition was evidence of material financial misconduct. The second was a planned elimination of more than 500 domestic jobs without independent review. The third was an attempt to sell a core production facility in violation of the company mission. Any two would allow the trust to demand an emergency board meeting. All 3 would restore my voting authority immediately. At 5:40 that morning, Marcus had called to tell me all 3 conditions had been met. I had been standing in my kitchen with the first cup of coffee untouched beside me when his name appeared on my phone. Marcus never called before 6 unless something had gone wrong. His voice was steady, but he did not waste time. "Daniel, the audit team found a side agreement tied to the Youngstown property. Victor plans to announce an expansion today, but the board packet authorizes a sale." I stared through the dark window above the sink. Rain had begun tapping against the glass. "How many jobs?" I asked. 697 in the first phase. More later. Independent review? Bypassed. Who signed the strategy recommendation? Marcus was silent for half a second. That pause told me more than his answer. "Claire." I did not speak. The refrigerator hummed behind me. Somewhere upstairs, Claire was getting ready for the event, probably choosing the navy suit she wore whenever she wanted a room to see authority before she said a word. Marcus continued. "There is more. Maintenance expenses were transferred out of the plant budget and recorded as completed capital improvements. The money did not reach the floor. I thought about the workers who would be arriving before sunrise. I thought about the rules we had written when the company was small enough for me to know every person by name. "Send me everything," I said. "I already did. Call the trustees. They are standing by. Do not activate the clause yet." Marcus took a breath. "Why not?" "Because I want to see the factory before the people who damaged it know I am looking." That was why I had driven through the rain in an old Ford instead of arriving with attorneys and security. I needed to know whether the reports described isolated failures or a culture that had been hollowed out from the inside. Now, standing beneath the glass offices, I had my answer. The silent forklift alarm, the damaged rail, the false repair logs. and the workers adapting to problems management claimed did not exist were not separate mistakes. They were evidence of a system designed to make the numbers look healthy while the factory carried the cost. My phone vibrated inside my jacket. A message from Marcus appeared on the screen. Trustees confirmed. Authority available upon signature. Thomas read my expression. Is it as bad as you thought? Worse, I said. Ethan looked toward the offices above us. Can they really sell this place? Not anymore. I opened the secure document Marcus had sent. At the bottom was a blank line waiting for my electronic signature. One movement of my thumb would restore the authority I had not used in years. I did not sign yet. Power used too early becomes a warning. Power used at the right moment becomes a fact. I locked the screen and returned the phone to my pocket. Thomas glanced at helmet number 001, then toward the workers quietly watching from nearby stations. What are you waiting for? He asked. I looked through the glass at the empty chair positioned at the head of the upstairs boardroom table. For Claire and Victor to finish explaining their future, I said. Then I am going to introduce them to the past they thought they had removed. Thomas led me through a side corridor toward the maintenance office, where Rebecca Sloan was waiting behind a desk covered with inspection reports. Rebecca had joined the company as a process engineer 18 years earlier and now managed the entire Youngstown facility. She stood when I entered, but her expression carried none of the surprise I had seen downstairs. Marcus called me 20 minutes ago, she said. He told me to cooperate with you and say nothing to Victor. I removed helmet number 001 and placed it on the desk. How much did you know? Rebecca closed the office door before answering. I knew the expansion announcement was misleading. I did not know the property sale was already drafted. Ethan remained near the door while Thomas pulled the blinds across the interior window. Rebecca opened a folder and spread several pages beside the helmet. The first showed a map of the factory divided into colored sections. The second listed production lines, employee counts, and estimated liquidation values. The third carried a heading that made my stomach tighten. Workforce transition schedule. 697 positions had been arranged by department and termination date. Maintenance went first. Receiving followed. Then machining, assembly, quality control, and shipping. The people were not identified by names. They were percentages, salary totals, and projected savings. Victor calls it Phase 1, Rebecca said. The remaining work would move to a contract facility outside the United States. This building would be sold to Eastboro Capital and converted into a distribution center. I turned to the final page. Claire's signature appeared beneath the recommendation. Her handwriting was unmistakable. I had seen it on anniversary cards, mortgage documents, and notes left beside the coffee maker. Here, the same careful curve of her name approved the removal of nearly 700 livelihoods. Did she understand what this meant? I asked. Rebecca looked directly at me. She presented it to the executive committee. The room became very quiet. For weeks, I had wondered whether Claire was being manipulated by Victor, whether she had signed something without reading the details, or whether ambition had carried her farther than she intended. Rebecca's answer removed that shelter. What was she promised? I asked. Rebecca slid another document across the desk. It was a draft organizational chart showing Victor as executive chairman and Claire as chief operating officer after the sale. Her new position had been highlighted in blue. Ethan stared at the chart. So they cut the plant, move the jobs, sell the property, and promote themselves. That is the plan, Rebecca said. Thomas shook his head slowly. Claire used to eat lunch with us on the dock. I looked again at her signature. People do not always become someone new. Sometimes success simply gives them permission to stop hiding who they have chosen to be. Rebecca turned her monitor toward me. A live feed from the presentation room showed Victor standing beneath a screen displaying the words "Building Tomorrow Together." Claire stood several feet away, smiling beside a model of the proposed expansion. Investors sat in neat rows while cameras recorded every polished sentence. Victor spoke about modernization, efficiency, and commitment to American manufacturing. He did not mention that the new equipment shown on the slides would never be installed here. He did not mention the sale agreement waiting for board approval. Claire stepped forward and described the Youngstown workforce as the heart of the company. Thomas looked away from the screen. Ethan did not. She knows, he said quietly. She knows what happens to everyone in this building, and she can still say that. I felt no sudden anger. What settled inside me was colder and clearer. Claire had not betrayed our marriage with another man. She had betrayed the values that created the life we shared. She had taken the loyalty of people who trusted this company and converted it into a line on her career plan. That kind of betrayal did not leave perfume on a collar or messages on a hidden phone. It wore a company badge and spoke confidently into a microphone. Rebecca opened an audio file attached to the audit. Victor's voice filled the office. He was speaking during a private strategy meeting recorded by the company system. Once the announcement is complete, we control the narrative. Employees hear expansion. Investors hear consolidation. By the time the sale becomes public, the transition agreements will already be signed. Then Claire answered. And Daniel? Victor asked. There was a brief pause before my wife's voice came through the speakers. Daniel has no operational role. He does not follow corporate matters anymore. Even if he hears about it, he will not understand the structure until it is finished. Thomas glanced at me, but I kept my eyes on the monitor. Victor laughed softly. You are certain the trust cannot interfere? Claire replied without hesitation. The trust is ceremonial. Daniel walked away years ago. I reached into my jacket and took out my phone. The secure document was still waiting. At the bottom, the signature line remained blank. I pressed my thumb against the screen and signed my name. A confirmation appeared 1 second later. Voting authority restored. Emergency governance provision active. Marcus sent a message almost immediately. Board members notified. Legal team entering facility now. On the monitor, Claire continued speaking about trust, tradition, and the future of the factory. She believed my silence had made me powerless. She was about to learn that the empty chair upstairs had never belonged to Victor. The signature had barely cleared when Ethan stepped closer to Rebecca's desk. There is something else, he said. His voice was quieter than before, and that made all three of us look at him. He glanced toward the closed office door, as if the walls themselves might be listening. 3 weeks ago, a technician named Caleb Morris was hurt near Assembly Line 7. Nothing severe enough to close the plant, but serious enough that the equipment should have been taken out of service. The emergency sensor failed, and the line did not shut down when it was supposed to. Rebecca's expression tightened. The official report said Caleb ignored procedure. Ethan shook his head. That is not what happened. I inspected the sensor 2 days before the incident. I submitted a replacement request and marked the unit unsafe for normal operation. My request disappeared from the system. After Caleb was taken to the clinic, I checked again. The service log showed the sensor had been replaced the previous week. Thomas folded his arms. Was it replaced? No. It is still the same unit. The office seemed to grow smaller around us. Financial misconduct could be hidden in accounting language. A property sale could be disguised as strategic growth. But a false safety record had a human name attached to it. Where is Caleb now? I asked. He returned on restricted duty, Ethan said. Management moved him to inventory control and told the shift not to discuss the incident. He has a wife and 2 children. He was afraid that if he challenged the report, they would blame him and eliminate his position during restructuring. Rebecca stood and reached for her radio. I raised one hand. Not yet. Who changed the record? Ethan removed a small flash drive from his pocket and placed it beside helmet number 001. I copied the revision history before my access was reduced. The maintenance request was deleted under an administrator account assigned to the Regional Operations Office. The final approval came from Martin Hale. I knew the name. Martin was Victor's senior vice president of operations, a man who spoke often about efficiency and rarely visited the production floor. Rebecca inserted the drive into her computer. A folder opened containing timestamps, photographs, service requests, and 2 versions of the incident report. The first version described a failed sensor and delayed maintenance. The second blamed employee error. The first carried Ethan's name. The second did not. Why did you keep this? I asked. Ethan looked through the interior window toward the workers outside. Because my father spent 34 years in a factory. He used to say a maintenance log is a promise written down. If someone changes it, they are not changing paperwork. They are changing who carries the risk. His answer brought back a memory of my own father standing in our first warehouse, telling me that a company revealed its character when no customer was watching. I had repeated that lesson for years. Then I had left, believing it had become permanent. I looked at the altered report again. Nothing about character is permanent. It has to be defended every time convenience offers a cheaper option. My phone rang. Marcus. I answered and put him on speaker. Daniel, The legal team is through security, he said. The emergency board notice has been delivered. Victor's office is demanding to know who authorized it. Do not answer yet. Understood. There is another issue. Eastborough Capital has representatives in the presentation room. They may attempt to secure signatures before the board convenes. I looked at Claire on the live monitor. She was shaking hands with a man I recognized from the sale documents. Then freeze. All authority related to the property transfer. I can do that under the restored provision. Do it. Also preserve every maintenance log, safety report, and administrator record from the past 18 months. No files leave the system. Marcus paused. Have you found evidence of tampering? I looked at Ethan. Enough to make this larger than a sale. After the call ended, Rebecca turned off the live feed. What happens now? She asked. I picked up the old helmet and placed it back on my head. Now we stop treating this like my personal return. The words surprised even me, but they were true. That morning had begun with Claire sending me away because she believed I no longer looked important. For a few minutes, I had allowed the insult to define the day. The altered report changed that. This was no longer about a lobby, a marriage, or a chair in a boardroom. It was about every worker who trusted a warning light, every family that depended on an honest record, and every manager who had learned that silence was easier than resistance. Bring Caleb somewhere private, I told Rebecca. Make sure he knows his job is protected. Ethan, give Marcus a complete copy of everything. Thomas, I need the safest route from here to the central production floor. Thomas looked at me carefully. You are going upstairs? Eventually. I opened the office door. Outside, more workers had gathered near the corridor, pretending to check tools while watching us. Word had continued spreading. First, I said, I am going to walk through the people this decision was supposed to erase. Somewhere above us, applause began inside the presentation room. Victor had probably reached the part where he promised a stronger future. Downstairs, the evidence of his future sat on a flash drive, and the factory was beginning to understand that the man in helmet number 001 had not returned for a ceremony. Thomas chose a route that followed the oldest production corridor toward the center of the factory. Rebecca walked several yards ahead, quietly asking supervisors to keep the aisles clear without explaining why. Ethan stayed behind to transfer the records to Marcus. I moved through the building. Wearing helmet number 001, my boots landing on concrete I had once helped seal by hand. At first, only the people nearest us looked up. A machinist paused beside a control panel. A quality inspector lowered her clipboard. 2 maintenance workers stopped speaking when they saw Thomas beside me. Recognition did not arrive like an announcement. It moved through the factory as a question. Is that him? The older employees answered with nods. The younger ones searched the company emblem above the lines and studied my face as if trying to connect a living man to a name they had seen on old documents. Thomas carried a radio clipped to his belt. A voice came through asking whether the founder was truly on the floor. He lifted the radio but did not answer immediately. They are asking what to do, he said. Tell them to keep working, I replied. No ceremony. Thomas pressed the button. Continue normal operations. No instructions have been issued. That should have ended it, but something else had already begun. Near machining line 3, Denise Walker stepped away from her inspection station. She removed her safety glasses, placed them on the table, and stood beside the aisle. She did not clap or call my name. She simply stood straight and watched me approach. The man beside her asked why. Denise answered quietly, but I heard enough. When Paul needed surgery, he changed the insurance plan for everyone. The man looked at me, then stood beside her. 50 feet farther, an older toolmaker named Samuel Price stopped his machine after completing its cycle. He removed his gloves and rose from his stool. Years earlier, during the recession, Samuel had expected to lose his job. Instead, I had reduced executive salaries and kept every hourly worker. He told the younger operator next to him. That operator stood, too. The gesture traveled faster than my steps. It passed from people who remembered to people who had only heard stories. At assembly line 2, a supervisor asked his crew to remain at their stations. No one argued. They finished the units in front of them, placed their tools down safely, and stood when the line reached its scheduled pause. 1 section became 3. 3 became 10. From the overhead walkway, I could see heads turning across the floor. White, blue, yellow, and orange helmets faced the central aisle. Some workers removed them and held them against their sides. Others kept them on, but stood with their shoulders squared. No signal had sounded. No executive had ordered them to move. The machines continued where stopping would have created a safety risk, but everywhere else, the factory gradually became quieter. Conveyor belts slowed. Tool motors settled. The constant metallic rhythm softened into scattered clicks and the distant hum of ventilation. Thomas looked around as if he had forgotten how large the workforce had become. "You told them to keep working," he said. "I did." Rebecca stopped near the entrance to the central floor. Her eyes moved across nearly 1,000 people already standing. "They are not doing this because someone told them to," she said. That truth carried more weight than any introduction Victor could have arranged. I had not seen most of these people in years. Many had never met me. They were not standing for a title hidden inside a trust. They were standing because the company still carried memories management had failed to erase. A radio message came from the East Wing, then another from shipping, then fabrication. Supervisors reported that workers were completing safe shutdown procedures and facing the main aisle. The count on Rebecca's tablet rose as sections checked in. 1,200, 1,500, 1,700. I continued walking, but every step became harder. Not because I was afraid, but because gratitude can humble a man more completely than shame. I had arrived that morning believing I might need to prove that I still mattered. These people reminded me that leadership was never supposed to be about being seen. It was about what remained in others after you left the room. At the far end of the central floor, the last assembly section reached its scheduled pause. The final bank of motors quieted. Nearly 2,000 employees stood across the factory. No one cheered. The silence itself became the welcome. Above us, the glass wall of the presentation room overlooked the floor. Figures began moving toward it, drawn by the sudden stillness below. Victor appeared first, holding a microphone at his side. Claire came beside him, her practiced smile fading as she followed the direction of every worker's gaze. She found me in the center aisle wearing the old white helmet. Even from that distance, I saw her posture change. For the first time that morning, she was not looking at my jacket, my truck, or the entrance I had used. She was looking at the people who knew exactly who had entered their factory.